The wind that rolled across Willow Bend carried dust, secrets, and the kind of cold that cut straight through a person's bones. It wasn't a gentle place. It wasn't a forgiving one. Folks here survived by grit, suspicion, and whatever bargains they could strike with fate. And for a girl like Lena Hart, fate had never been generous. Lena walked along the uneven boardwalk with her head lowered, clutching a worn shawl around her shoulders. The town looked past her the way it always did. She was the poor relation, the orphan girl taken in by kin who never wanted her. Every shop window reflected the same truth: Lena didn't belong anywhere. Not really. Her uncle had made sure she knew it. "Best you earn your keep," he'd say. "A mouth like yours costs more than it's worth." So, she scrubbed floors, patched clothes, and kept quiet. Quiet was safer. Quiet made life survivable. But even surviving felt heavy in Willow Bend. Caleb Morgan stepped out of the general store across the street, the morning sun catching on the broad lines of his shoulders. People called him a man carved from weathered oak, still standing after storms that would have broken most men. A widower. A rancher. A father of 3 children who had forgotten what laughter sounded like since their mother died. Caleb's face was set in its usual hard shape, though not unkind. Just distant. Tired. Haunted by responsibilities that never eased. The townsfolk whispered he was cold, that he didn't feel much of anything anymore. Others claimed he wanted a woman only to tend his home and wrangle his children so he could bury himself in ranch work. His boots thudded against the boards as he headed toward his wagon. He barely noticed Lena at first, another shadow in a town full of them, but something about her quiet movement made him glance twice. She walked as though braced for a blow. Behind lace curtains, the town's gossiping eyes shifted like predators tracking a wounded calf. People always found something to whisper about, and today was no different. "Poor girl," murmured Mrs. Teller near the bakery doorway. "Her family's about to force her hand. They say Caleb's taking her." Taking? More like buying. He'll have himself a worker, not a wife. Lena didn't hear the words, but she felt the weight of them in the air, heavy, accusing, certain of her fate long before she was. At the edge of town, her uncle waited beside a wagon, arms crossed, face sour with impatience. The lines in his skin seemed etched from years of resentment. Lena approached carefully, shoulders rounded, like a child entering a scolding. "You're late," he muttered. "Got business to finish." "Caleb Morgan agreed to take you in. Debt's cleared, and you'll do as you're told. Understand?" Her heart twisted. She understood too well. This wasn't a marriage. It was an exchange, her life traded for a debt she never owed. Still, she nodded. What choice did she have? No one ever asked what she wanted. Caleb stood a few paces away, jaw tight, hat pulled low. He wasn't a cruel man, Lena could see that even through her fear, but he looked like someone who had forgotten softness existed. His 3 children lingered behind him, Thomas, the eldest at 12, Emily, barely 8, and little Jonah, who clung to his father's coat like a frightened pup. None of them smiled. Not at her. Not at anyone. Caleb cleared his throat. "Miss Hart." "Mr. Morgan," she whispered. Their first exchange lasted seconds, yet Lena felt the shape of her future settle around her like a heavy cloak. Everyone expected her to be used, worn down, swallowed by the endless demands of ranch life and a grieving family. Everyone expected Caleb to claim her the moment the sun fell. That was the way of Willow Bend. Harsh. Predictable. Inevitable. But as the cold wind swept across the road and the wedding arrangements were made without ceremony or gentleness, something flickered briefly in Caleb's eyes, not desire, not possession, but restraint. A pause. As if he sensed the fear radiating from the girl handed like property. No one noticed. No one imagined he would do anything except what men in this town always did. And Lena, with trembling hands and a throat full of dread, could only brace herself for a life decided by others. A life about to begin in the stern, silent home of Caleb Morgan. The wedding happened the way all hurried arrangements in Willow Bend did, quiet, practical, and stripped of every ounce of tenderness. The preacher barely looked up from his worn Bible. Lena's uncle stood beside her, impatient as ever, eager to be rid of a responsibility he never wanted. Caleb Morgan stood on her other side, broad-shouldered and unreadable, his children gathering around him like wary shadows. The vows themselves felt like a blur. A few words spoken without celebration. A few murmured replies. A few nods from the preacher. And then it was done. Just like that, Lena Hart became Lena Morgan in name only, bound to a future she didn't choose. The town watched from porches, windows, and doorways. People always watched. Whispers clung to the cold air like frost on iron. He'll take her home tonight. Poor girl doesn't know what she's in for. A widower with 3 children and a cold bed. Lord help her. Lena kept her eyes down, cheeks warm with humiliation. She wasn't naive. She knew what people expected to happen on a wedding night, especially a marriage that cost her uncle's debt instead of a dowry. Her stomach twisted at the thought. Caleb lifted her trunk into the wagon with a grunt. He moved with practiced strength, but no hint of harshness. Lena climbed onto the seat beside him, stiff as a fence post, unsure where to place her hands. He didn't look at her, only flicked the reins and began the long ride out of town. The children sat in the back, silent but watchful. Little Jonah peeked over the edge, wide-eyed. Emily clutched a rag doll to her chest, chewing her lip. Thomas, the eldest, held himself tall and guarded, as if shielding his siblings from the stranger they now had to call Ma, even if only in theory. Lena didn't try to speak. Her voice had always made trouble, and silence was safer. Caleb didn't speak either. The only sounds were the creak of the wagon wheels and the distant cries of crows circling above the winter fields. The Morgan Ranch appeared like a dark silhouette against the horizon, weather-beaten fences, a wide barn, and a sturdy house built from thick timber. Smoke curled from the chimney, but it didn't look inviting. It looked tired, like a place grieving the warmth it once held. Caleb helped the children down first, then offered Lena his hand. She hesitated, but accepted. His grip was steady, warm, even gentle, yet she pulled away quickly, unsure whether gentleness was a trick or an accident. Inside, the house smelled faintly of wood smoke and old memories. A single quilt lay folded across the sofa, clearly placed there for necessity, not comfort. The kitchen table held mismatched plates from hurried meals. This was not a home that expected guests, let alone a new wife. Caleb cleared his throat. You'll find the children's room at the end of the hall. Mine is there. He pointed to a closed door. There's a spare room across from it. You can settle your things there for now. Lena blinked. A spare room, she whispered. He nodded once. Yes. She didn't know what surprised her more, that he offered it, or that he said nothing else. The children hovered nearby. Emily tugged Jonah behind her, studying Lena with shy caution. Thomas crossed his arms. You gonna take Ma's place? He asked bluntly. Lena's heart tightened. No, she whispered. I could never take someone's place. I can only try to be helpful. Thomas didn't reply, but his eyes softened a fraction. A cold wind howled against the walls, rattling the house. Night was falling fast. Lena knew what the town expected to happen next. The wedding night. The claiming. The proof that she was now another man's possession. Her pulse raced. Caleb stood quietly near the kitchen doorway, shoulders tense, jaw set. He looked like a man fighting his own thoughts. Finally, he spoke. I'll finish the chores outside. You rest. Rest? On her wedding night? She nodded numbly, unsure if this was mercy or delay. When the door closed behind him, Lena exhaled shakily. She walked to the small spare room. It was cold, but clean. A simple bed. A wooden chair. A quilt folded neatly at the foot. She sank onto the mattress, trembling. She didn't know what Caleb intended, but she braced herself for whatever the night would bring. Outside, the barn lantern flickered to life. Caleb Morgan wasn't walking toward her room. He was walking away from it. The shadows of evening deepened across the ranch as Lena sat on the edge of the spare room bed, hands clasped tight in her lap. Every creak of the house made her flinch. Every gust of wind against the shutters made her brace. She'd been taught all her life to expect the worst, that kindness was temporary, that gentleness was a trick, that hardship was the only certainty. So when footsteps finally sounded down the hallway, her heart pounded so hard it hurt. But they faded away, then moved toward the front door instead. A moment later, the quiet thud of boots leaving the house reached her ears. Lena pressed a hand to her mouth. He wasn't coming to her room. Not now. Maybe not at all. Outside, the barn lantern flickered softly. Caleb Morgan was bedding down his horse for the night, moving with a heaviness that came from years of grief and duty. He brushed down the mare, fed the cattle, and swept the barn aisle, chores he normally split between himself and the children. Tonight, he did every bit of it alone. Inside the house, the children huddled around the small kitchen table, eating cold stew Thomas had reheated. The boy glanced toward the window, then toward the hall where Lena's door stood slightly ajar. "He ain't comin' in," Thomas murmured. Emily hugged her doll. "But they're married. Pa's supposed to." Jonah just blinked sleepily. "Is she gonna cry?" Thomas didn't answer, but something uncertain flickered in his eyes. Their father wasn't a cruel man, but he had become unreadable since their mother died. He worked until his hands bled, spoke only when needed, and kept every emotion locked behind that stonewall calm. Upstairs, Lena paced the small room, unsure what to do with the strange feeling rising in her chest. Relief, and confusion. Fear, and a warmth that frightened her even more. Why wasn't he coming? Why avoid her? Was he angry? Disgusted? Regretting the arrangement? Or, could it be, was he trying to spare her? No. Men in this town didn't spare women like her. She pressed her palm against the cold windowpane, watching the small light glowing from the barn. Caleb was moving around inside, his silhouette long and weary. He spread a blanket over a pile of hay, sat down heavily, and dropped his head into his hands. He was sleeping out there on their wedding night. Lena drew back from the window, stunned. That wasn't just unexpected, it was unheard of. Hours passed in strained silence. Eventually, she heard the children climb into their beds. The house settled into the uneasy quiet of unfamiliar company. At last, exhausted from fear and confusion, Lena lay down on the spare bed, pulling the thin quilt up to her chin. Sleep came in small, trembling breaths. By morning, pale winter light crept across the floorboards. Lena awoke, unsure for a moment where she was. Then, memory crashed over her. The rushed wedding. The long, silent ride. The cold house. Caleb's steady but distant voice. His boots were walking away instead of toward her. She dressed quickly, tying her hair back and smoothing her skirt. She had been given to a man she barely knew, and now she had to face him in the morning light. In the kitchen, the children were already awake. Thomas stood at the stove, stirring a pot of oats. Emily and Jonah sat at the table, watching her carefully. Emily offered a small, hesitant smile. "Morning." "Good morning," Lena whispered. "Can I help?" Thomas shrugged with a stiff attempt at politeness. "If you want." She stepped beside him, guiding the ladle gently. "Stir slower," she murmured. "It won't burn that way." Thomas blinked at her, surprised but not offended. The back door opened, letting in a sweep of cold air. Caleb entered, coat dusted with frost, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. He paused when he saw Lena at the stove, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said quietly. "Good morning," she replied. Their gazes held, just for a moment. Not as husband and wife. Not as strangers. Something in between. He looked away first, clearing his throat. "I'll handle the outside chores today." "You don't need to, push yourself." Lena nodded, though part of her wanted to argue she wasn't helpless. As Caleb stepped back outside, Jonah whispered loudly, "Pa slept in the barn again." Thomas elbowed him. Emily hid a grin. Lena's cheeks warmed, but deep inside, something else stirred, something like astonishment, and maybe, a sliver of hope. Caleb Morgan had chosen restraint over entitlement. And the town would never believe what had happened in the dark silence of that first night. Whispers traveled faster than stagecoaches in Willow Bend, and by the next morning, gossip moved through the town like wildfire on dry grass. The story twisted with every retelling, but the heart of it remained the same. Caleb Morgan didn't touch the girl. Not even a hand on her. He slept in the barn, on their wedding night. Some folks scoffed. Some laughed. Some shook their heads as if Caleb had lost his mind. But a few, especially the older women who'd known too many loveless unions, fell uncharacteristically quiet. Something about it unsettled them. Perhaps even humbled them. Back at the ranch, Lena didn't know about the rumors yet, but she could feel something shifting inside the house. Not comfort, not yet, but a loosening of old, cold tension, like winter soil softening ever so slightly before spring. Caleb returned to the house after finishing the morning chores, his boots muddy, his hands rough and red from the cold. He set his gloves on the counter, nodding a brief greeting. "Breakfast looks good," he said. "It's just oats," Thomas replied. "It's better than what I made yesterday." Caleb's mouth twitched, almost forming a smile. The children stared, shocked. It had been months since they saw even a hint of that expression. Lena carefully set bowls out for everyone, still unsure how close to stand, how much to speak, how much silence he expected from her. Caleb cleared his throat. "You don't need to take on too much today. The first weeks can be unsettling. I'll handle the heavy chores." Lena blinked. "I don't wish to be idle." "You won't be," he said gently. "But there's a difference between help and burden." She lowered her gaze, uncertain how to respond to a man who spoke to her like she mattered. No one had ever drawn that distinction with her before. After breakfast, the children dragged their feet toward their tasks. Emily was supposed to sweep the porch, but kept glancing at Lena. Jonah was tasked with gathering kindling but paused in the doorway, staring. Finally, Emily asked in a small voice, "Do you read stories?" Lena hesitated. "I do." The girl brightened, as if a spark lit behind her eyes. "Maybe, after chores." Emily whispered. Lena nodded. "I'd like that." Thomas, trying to act older than his years, rolled his eyes, but he listened from a distance, curiosity gnawing at the edges of his stubbornness. By midday, the ranch was bustling with hesitant new rhythms. Lena folded laundry on the porch while Emily played nearby. Jonah collected sticks, carefully piling them just like Caleb taught. Every so often, Thomas would appear near the railing, pretending he needed something from the water barrel, when really he was watching Lena and deciding if she could be trusted. Inside the barn, Caleb mulled over his decision from the night before. Giving Lena his spare room wasn't a grand gesture, it felt like the bare minimum of decency. But the shock in her eyes, the relief, it was enough to unsettle him in ways he hadn't expected. He wasn't ready for another woman in his life. His grief still hung heavy, like a shadow that refused to fade. Yet he couldn't bring himself to take what wasn't freely given, not from a girl forced into a marriage because of debt. Honor wasn't supposed to feel this complicated. By the time he returned to the house for lunch, Lena was tutoring the children at the kitchen table. Letters, simple sums, soft encouragements. Her voice, quiet but steady, filled the room with something the house had been missing for a long time. Warmth. Emily scribbled her letters eagerly. Jonah hummed as he tried to copy her. Even Thomas, pretending to dislike lessons, leaned close enough to see. Lena glanced up as Caleb entered. "I hope it's all right," she murmured. "They asked, and I didn't want to refuse them." Caleb paused in the doorway, watching his children's faces, soft, focused, alive. Something tightened in his throat. "It's more than all right," he said quietly. She looked down again, but a faint color rose in her cheeks. Later that afternoon, Lena went into town to fetch supplies with Thomas. It was her first time leaving the ranch since the wedding. She hadn't even stepped off the wagon before the whispers reached her. "There she is. Untouched, they say. Poor thing. He must not want her. Or he's lost his nerve." Lena froze. Thomas stiffened beside her, face flushing in angry embarrassment. The world felt colder than ever, but now, for the first time, she wasn't facing its cruelty alone. The wooden steps of the general store creaked beneath Lena's boots as she followed Thomas inside, trying to pretend she didn't hear the whispers that clung to her like burrs. Willow Bend had always been sharp-tongued, but today the words had a new kind of bite. Shame, really. A husband who won't claim his wife. Or maybe she scared him off. Well, look at her, poor thing, probably cried herself to sleep. Lena kept her eyes on the shelves, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for a sack of flour. Thomas stayed close, closer than he had the day before, his small jaw set in anger he didn't know how to express. "You don't gotta listen to them," he muttered. "I'm not," she whispered. But they both knew she was. Mr. Harland, the storekeeper, cleared his throat awkwardly as he rang up the supplies. "Heard you're settling in at the Morgan place," he said, trying for polite conversation and failing. "Hope it's comfortable." Lena offered a tight smile. "Yes, sir. Everyone has been very kind." Thomas snorted under his breath. The man's gaze drifted toward her left hand, then toward the door, then back again. He didn't ask the question, but Lena saw it in his eyes. Why didn't Caleb take what was his? She gathered the supplies quickly and followed Thomas outside. But the moment they stepped onto the dusty street, Mrs. Teller and two other women blocked their path, their expressions dripping with false sweetness. "Well, if it isn't Mrs. Morgan," Mrs. Teller said, emphasizing the title. "How are you feeling today? Rested?" Her voice curled around the word with cruel insinuation. Thomas's fists clenched. Lena lifted her chin, though her throat burned. "I'm quite well, thank you." Mrs. Teller replied, exchanging looks with her companions. "I suppose it must be odd. A wedding night spent alone." Heat flooded Lena's face. Thomas stepped forward. "Pa ain't like other men. He." Lena gently touched his shoulder. "Thomas, let's go." But Mrs. Teller wasn't finished. "If your husband isn't interested, dear, I'm sure some of the widowers around here would be." Lena froze. Thomas looked ready to strike someone. Then a new voice cut through the tension. "That'll be enough." Caleb stood a few paces away, expression stone-hard, eyes colder than January wind. He must have ridden into town unnoticed, because no one had heard a horse approach. The three women stepped back, startled. Mrs. Teller tried to recover her courage. "Caleb, we're only concerned." "No," he said sharply. "You're curious. And cruel. Nothing more." She swallowed. "Well, people are talking. Let them." Caleb's jaw locked. "But you will not question my wife's worth in front of my children." Lena's heart stilled. Her worth. His wife. Said not as a duty, but as a defense. Mrs. Teller's face soured. She muttered something and hurried away with her companions trailing behind. Thomas let out a breath he'd been holding, shoulders loosening just a little. Lena, however, couldn't move. She felt 20 emotions at once: relief, embarrassment, gratitude, and confusion. Caleb walked up to her slowly. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though her voice failed her. He looked down at the sacks in her arms. "Let me carry those." Before she could protest, he took them effortlessly and guided Thomas back toward the wagon. As they rode home, silence filled the space between them, but it wasn't the cold silence of strangers. It was heavy, thoughtful, protective. Back at the ranch, he unloaded the supplies while the children gathered near the porch. Lena watched him from the doorway, feeling oddly small and strangely seen. Later that day, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the yard, Caleb found her near the clothesline. "About earlier," he began. "You don't have to explain," she said softly. He shook his head. "I'm not explaining. I'm telling you something plain." He paused, meeting her eyes. "What they say about you isn't true. And what they assume about me isn't their concern." She swallowed. "People think you regret the marriage." His jaw tightened. "I don't regret keeping you safe." Safe. The word wrapped around her like warmth. Before she could respond, a cold gust swept over the ranch, carrying the scent of the oncoming winter. Caleb looked toward the hills. "Storms brewing," he murmured. "We'll need to prepare." But inside Lena's chest, for the first time in years, something gentle flickered to life, fragile, uncertain, but unmistakably real. Someone had defended her. Not out of duty. Not out of possession. But out of honor. The storm that Caleb had smelled on the wind rolled in sooner than anyone expected. By nightfall, the sky had darkened to a bruised purple, and the temperature dropped so quickly the animals grew restless in their stalls. Snow hadn't yet begun to fall, but the air carried the sharp warning of it. Inside the house, Lena worked quietly in the kitchen while the children dried their boots by the fire. The warmth of the flames cast soft light across the room, making the home feel less cold, less empty. Jonah leaned against her knee, half asleep, while Emily hummed as she stitched a torn button onto her doll. Even Thomas, who had resisted everything the day before, sat at the table rubbing oil into the handle of his father's old pocket knife, watching Lena in a way that was no longer suspicious, but thoughtful. Caleb came in last, brushing snowflakes from his hair. His coat dripped slowly onto the floorboards. He hung it near the hearth and took in the sight before him, his children gathered tight around a woman who, only days ago, they had treated like a stranger. Something softened in his expression. Something almost vulnerable. "Storm'll be rough," he said. "We'll need to ration the dry wood." Lena nodded. "The children and I brought in what we could." "You did more than enough." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "Thank you." The words warmed her more than the fire. When the evening settled and the children went to their beds, Caleb stepped outside to check the barn one last time. Lena followed him to the door, hugging a shawl around her shoulders. "Will the animals be safe?" she asked. "They'll manage," he said. "I'll bed them down extra warm. Not the first storm they've weathered." She watched him pull on his coat, watched the way he braced against the wind. She wanted to say something, anything, but years of being unseen had taught her caution. So she simply offered, "Be careful." Their eyes met. "I will," he said. And with that, he disappeared into the storm-dark night. The wind howled through the rafters for hours, rattling shutters and pushing cold air through even the tightest cracks in the walls. Lena couldn't sleep. Every gust made her think of Caleb in the barn, of the bed of hay he'd chosen instead of the bed inside the house. Instead of her. Guilt twisted inside her. She had been given to him, forced into his life like an unwanted obligation, and still he treated her not as a chore, but as a human being. Near midnight, a soft cry echoed down the hallway. Lena slipped from her bed and followed the sound to Jonah's room. The little boy was trembling, his cheeks flushed, his breathing tight. "Jonah," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "Cold," he whimpered. "It hurts." She touched his forehead and felt the fever immediately, hot, burning, rising too fast. Heart pounding, Lena lifted him into her arms and hurried to the living room. Emily stumbled out behind her, frightened. Thomas emerged next, his face pale. "What's wrong with him?" Thomas whispered. "He's feverish," Lena said. "Fetch cold water. Quickly." Thomas didn't hesitate. Emily ran to grab blankets. Together, the three of them worked to cool Jonah's skin. Lena held him close, whispering gently, her voice steady even though her fear grew with every minute. The wind howled louder, shaking the house. Caleb. They needed Caleb. Thomas looked toward the window. Pa's still in the barn. Lena didn't think, she simply wrapped Jonah in a quilt and hurried to the door. But the moment she opened it, a blast of freezing air nearly knocked her backward. Snow had begun falling, thick, blinding, relentless. "You can't go out in that," Thomas cried. "I have to," she insisted. "Jonah needs his father. Fetch another blanket and stay by the fire." Without another word, Lena plunged into the storm, clutching the shivering child close to her chest. Snow stung her face and soaked her skirts, but she pushed forward, step by step, toward the faint glow of the barn lantern. Inside, Caleb was stacking hay when the door burst open. "Caleb!" Lena gasped, breathless. "Jonah's burning up." Caleb turned, and everything in him tightened. In 2 strides, he was beside her, pulling the boy into his arms. "Why didn't you send Thomas?" "There wasn't time." Her voice shook, not from cold, but from fear. Caleb's eyes met hers. For the first time, something unguarded shone in them. "You shouldn't risk yourself for us." She swallowed hard. "You're my family now." The storm roared around them, but in that moment, the space between them grew warm, dangerously, impossibly warm. And neither of them stepped back. The storm raged through the night, flinging snow and wind against the barn, but inside, Jonah's fever slowly broke with Caleb's steady hands and Lena's gentle whispers. By dawn, the boy lay sleeping under warm blankets, his tiny chest rising and falling with regularity. Outside, the ranch was buried under a heavy coat of snow, drifts reaching halfway up the fence posts, but inside, an uneasy calm settled over the house. Lena sat in the kitchen, sipping a thin cup of broth Caleb had prepared, feeling the adrenaline of the night's chaos fade into exhaustion. Her body ached, but it wasn't just from fatigue. It was from the realization that she had risked everything for the family that had been handed to her without choice, and that they had risked everything for her in return. Caleb entered the kitchen quietly, brushing snow from his coat. He paused, watching her for a long moment. The children were still asleep, trusting her in ways that tugged at his heart. Slowly, he spoke. "You could have been hurt out there." "I had to," Lena replied softly. "Jonah needed me. You needed me." Her voice faltered, and she looked down at her hands. I feel like I've always been a burden. And yet, last night, this morning, I don't know what to think anymore." Caleb crossed the room, kneeling to meet her gaze. His eyes, usually so guarded, were open, raw, and unyielding. "You are not a burden. You never were." Her chest tightened. "I've always felt unwanted. My family, this town, even," she swallowed hard, unable to finish. Caleb placed a hand over hers, strong and steady. "And yet here you are. I've watched you care for my children, face down a storm, risk yourself without a thought for your own safety. You've earned something far beyond survival, you've earned respect. You've earned our trust. And he paused, searching her face, "I've failed to show you that before. Not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid of failing you, as I failed your mother." The words hit Lena like a blow. She swallowed hard, shaking her head. "I don't know if I can ever belong here." "You already do," he said. "But I want you to choose it. Always choose it, not because you're forced, but because you want to be part of this family." Her throat tightened. She had never had a choice like that. Never had anyone ask if she wanted to stay, not in her home, not in her life. And yet, for the first time, she felt a strange, fragile hope stirring in her chest. Before she could respond, a sudden clatter came from the barn. They both leapt to their feet, the storm outside still battering the walls. One of the horses had panicked in its stall, its flailing legs threatening to injure itself. Caleb grabbed a rope, and Lena moved swiftly to help steady the animal. Working together, they calmed it, voices low, hands steady. In the midst of chaos, they moved in perfect unison, instinctively protecting each other and the animals. Once the horse was secured, Caleb leaned against the post, chest heaving. Lena stood nearby, shivering from the cold but glowing with adrenaline. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Caleb spoke, voice quiet but firm. "I'm tearing up the contract. This marriage, it isn't because of duty, because of debt, because of expectation. It's your choice now, Lena. You stay because you want to. Not because anyone forced you." Tears pricked at her eyes. The weight of her past, the years of being unwanted, traded, dismissed, pressed down on her. And yet here was a man, a father, a rancher who could have taken what was owed to him, choosing instead to honor her. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. I choose to stay." Caleb's lips curved into a faint, relieved smile. "Then welcome, officially, truly, to our family." The snow continued to fall outside, but inside, the warmth was different now. It was not just from the fire or the blankets, but from trust, from honor, and from the first fragile bonds of love forming where there had been only duty and fear. For the first time, Lena felt she wasn't a burden, she wasn't property, and she wasn't invisible. She was chosen. And that choice, freely given, felt more powerful than anything the harsh world of Willow Bend could ever take away. The storm finally passed, leaving the ranch blanketed in fresh snow that sparkled under the pale morning sun. The world outside felt clean and silent, as if nature itself had paused to witness the quiet miracles within the Morgan home. Inside, life began to hum with a sense of calm and renewal. Lena stood on the porch, brushing snow from the railing, while the children played in the yard. Jonah laughed as he tumbled in the drifts, Emily built a small fort from the soft snow, and even Thomas, usually so stoic, threw a handful of powdery flakes at the others with a reluctant grin. The sound of their laughter wrapped around her heart, a balm for old wounds she had long believed would never heal. Caleb stepped onto the porch beside her, hands tucked into his coat pockets, eyes scanning the children as if he were guarding the most precious treasure in the world. Then his gaze shifted to Lena, soft and steady, a warmth in his expression she had learned to recognize as care, respect, and something deeper, something like love. "You did well," he said quietly, nodding toward the children. "They're happy because of you." Lena shook her head gently, a shy smile playing on her lips. "I didn't do it alone. They helped me, too." Caleb's eyes softened. "Perhaps. But it takes more than skill or kindness to earn their trust. You have something rare, something I've rarely seen. You treat people like they matter, not like they owe you something in return." Her cheeks warmed. For so long, she had been used to being overlooked, dismissed, or worse. To hear this acknowledgement from him, the man she now called her husband, not by duty but by choice, was almost more than she could bear. The children ran toward them, snow dripping from their hair, cheeks flushed and bright with joy. Jonah ran straight into her arms. "Ma!" he exclaimed. The word slipped from him naturally, instinctively, unforced. Emily and Thomas followed, their faces bright. Emily tugged at Lena's hand. "Will you teach us more tomorrow, Miss Lena?" she asked. "Yes," Lena replied, her voice steady, though her heart ached with happiness. "I will." Caleb watched quietly, letting her enjoy the moment, letting her shine as he had promised. Then he spoke softly, barely above the whisper of the wind through the trees. "Shall we begin our marriage again?" he asked, tone careful, respectful. "Not because of obligation, but because we both choose it." Lena turned to him, eyes glistening, heart swelling. "Yes," she said firmly. "I choose it. Every day." Caleb reached out, taking her hand gently in his own, a simple touch that carried more meaning than any grand gesture. They stood together on the porch, overlooking the ranch, snow-dusted fields, timbered fences, the barn looming silently but solidly in the background. The town below could gossip all it wanted. They could speculate, judge, and mock. But on this porch, with the children around them and the wind whispering through the trees, Lena and Caleb knew the truth: honor, courage, and respect were the strongest foundations for a family. The kind of foundation that could weather storms, both literal and metaphorical. Lena glanced at Caleb, a quiet laugh escaping her lips. "I never imagined it could feel like this, safe. Warm. Wanted." Caleb's lips curved, a slow, rare smile that reached his eyes. "You should feel that way. You should always feel that way. Not just here, but anywhere. And I'll do my best to make sure you do." The children clustered around them, forming a tight, imperfect circle of new beginnings. Their laughter and chatter mingled with the crisp morning air, a testament to survival, to resilience, and to the quiet, shocking power of choosing honor over cruelty. Lena squeezed Caleb's hand, then looked out across the snow-draped fields. The ranch, the home, and the family they had built together weren't perfect. They bore the marks of loss, hardship, and struggle. But they were theirs, constructed with patience, respect, and moral courage in a world that so often demanded otherwise. And in a world that expected cruelty, Lena realized the most astonishing act of all was simple: to honor, to protect, and to love with integrity. As the morning sun reflected off the snow, casting the Morgan Ranch in a golden glow, Lena and Caleb stood side by side on the porch with their 3 children. Together, they faced the future, not as victims of circumstance, but as a family built on choice, dignity, and the quiet, enduring strength of the human heart. In the harsh frontier of Willow Bend, the most shocking act wasn't wealth, force, or power, it was honor. And that honor had brought them all home. If you loved Lena and Caleb's story of courage and honor, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another Wild West tale of love and bravery.